Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today I want to talk about Dungeons and Dragons, and I want to talk about Book of Many Things, Chapter 6, the Rogue chapter, BOMT, Chapter 6, BOMT, Book of Many Things. So, one of the things, I'm just going to say it again. The Every Dungeons and Dragons canon hardback is a massive event in all of tabletop, and increasingly, right? What happens on Dungeons and Dragons isn't about Dungeons and Dragons, right? Last year, Larion, published a video game. It was a Dungeons and Dragons video game, but it wasn't the best. It wasn't the best fantasy video game. It wasn't the best action video game. It was the best video game of the year, right? The entire video game industry was impacted by Dungeons and Dragons, right? And increasingly, when we talk about Dungeons and Dragons, everything else, it's tabletop RPG. With Dungeons and Dragons, you don't have to say that. You could just say tabletop, right? Because Dungeons and Dragons has war games. It has role-playing games. It is role-playing games. And it has board games. Like, it has everything. It literally has everything. And to be clear, Dungeons and Dragons does not have any war games because it broke away from war games. And yet, Dungeons and Dragons makes so many miniatures, and so many miniatures are made specifically for Dungeons and Dragons that many, like Frostgrave, has no dedicated miniatures for it, right? It just simply uses you can use it's company agnostic for miniatures. Truly incredible. So Dungeons and Dragons is really a tabletop. It is connected to every corner of tabletop, and I really believe it is the experience in tabletop that matters most. And it doesn't matter if that's in the war game space. It doesn't matter if that's in the RPG space. It doesn't matter if that's in the board game space. It rules, like, across all these genres, right? It's across all these subsections of tabletop. All right, let me talk about so BOMT comes, Book of Many Things comes in, and so this chapter is chapter 6, the Rogue, right? And what really blew me away is it's like, hey, when the Rogue card gets, the entire chapter is themed by one card. This is new. This has never been done. There's 22 chapters in Book of Many Things, and the designers were like, we're not going to organize this book like any other book that's ever been printed. We're going to use a new structure, a new theming, based on the physical object that is with this book, right? And it really is courageous. And there are 22 chapters in Book of Many Things because there are 22 iconic cards in the deck of Many Things, right? It's truly astounding. So, but the Rogue card is, when the Rogue card comes up, it means the villain has arrived, right? And Book of Many Things chapter 6 deals with, okay, they're like, hey, you just drew the Rogue card. Now you need a rogue to come in and really challenge and lay out your player characters, right? And it's amazing. Like, every single D&D canon hardback is setting the bar for what is done in every other tabletop role-playing game. People pretend they're not looking at D&D when they do whatever OSR or indie game they're source book or core rule book they're creating, but they are all are hyper focused on Dungeons and Dragons, right? And so this one, and so the Dungeons and Dragons designers, I think, when I look at these stat blocks that are, so chapter 6 is a bunch of stat blocks, and those stat blocks are, hey, the villain has arrived. Now what are you going to do? What are you going to do to the player characters? You're the dungeon master, right? Are you going to run another combat they forget, right? Because they used up, two-thirds of their health, two-thirds of their health points, two-thirds of their hit points, and not one of them dropped? Or are you going to drop half the party, right? Are you going to have half the party making death saves and leave, and leave it to one or two party members to desperately scrape out and defeat the villain, or escape with the people who are in the middle of death saves, right? Like it's really why, because these villains, every single villain in this blew me away. Every single villain stat block in BOMT Chapter 6 is legendary, with legendary actions, right? And the reason why is, I think designers, they've been hearing the OSR and the indie, the OSR specifically, are constantly whining, saying, oh, you play Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition and you're playing superheroes, and it's just it's ridiculous, and there's no danger, and D&D 5e isn't good, right? The same grognard complaint, different day, right? And forgetting that Beckme, the I in Beckme was immortal, and literally the dude on the cover from the OSR Beckme looks like he's flying like Superman, literally a superhero. Like, strong characters have been in Dungeons and Dragons from the beginning, right? Like, it's just such an absurd complaint. But the designers were like, people complain that D&D 5e isn't deadly, and it's such an absurd complaint, right? Because like right in the middle of BOMT, you have BOMT Chapter 6 with these rogues, and you have no less than like a half a dozen to a dozen stat blocks of absolute reapers, right? Just, very, very, very strong villains that are going to drop your player characters, right? And you could bring in one, you could bring in three, right? And the other thing is, like, the other one is, they were kind of like, it's such a, like, every D&D canon hardback pushes against Dungeons and Dragons itself, and almost warps the envelope, right? Almost tears the envelope, right? They push so hard, and any one of these guys, right? Because any one of these guys or gals, stat block villains in BOMT Chapter 6 are legendary and are absolute reapers. And also, there's a good chance you're going to pull one of these out and you are going to TPK the entire party. And then everybody's like, hey, what happened, man? That's not supposed to happen. And you're like, hey, like, you think D&D 5e, you don't. And that's the issue, is like OSR and indie constantly are trotting out complaints that are 5, 10, 15 years old, that are no longer really relevant in Dungeons & Dragons, but they continue to complain about it. And the reason they continue to complain about it is they literally don't know what's going on in modern Dungeons & Dragons. Now, one thing is, I'm going to say thank you. I have some grognard showing up on the channel based on based on the top 10, tabletop role-playing games you could stop playing now in order to be ready for Dungeons & Dragons Infinite Edition coming out this year. And so I just had I had 3 videos, and they're not my most viewed videos, but they are definitely the most commented videos within 2 or 3 years, right? Like, very, very, like, highly commented. And what was wild was these grognards rolled in, complained, right? But one thing that's nice, and it's continuing to happen, these grognards stay. And like, they drop their complaints on one video, but then they're commenting on others, right? And they are staying because the grognard, the OSR and the indie, the OSR grognard is an echo chamber. And I think that's one thing that I'm really trying to do with my channel, and I think I'm reaching it, is I'm not saying, you will not hear anyone in the world saying about D&D what I say. And the reason why is I have tons of opinions that I agree with people on Dungeons & Dragons. You're hearing it from other creators. Why should you hear it from me? So I give you the new, the fresh, the opinions I have about Dungeons & Dragons that are unique, right? So BOMT, Chapter 6 Rogue, incredible stat blocks. Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition is as dangerous as any tabletop role-playing game on the market. It is it can go beast mode at the flip of a switch. Don't ever forget it. Every single word you just heard is my humble opinion. Nothing more, nothing less. It's barely important. The important part is when I hear your humble opinion. When you get in the comments and send your traffic, please consider liking, subscribing, and have a wonderful, wonderful fetch millennium.